Hey, hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. Can you tell I'm excited to be back in my apartment with all of my stuff behind me? It's great. I love it. It's much, much better than a white wall. Happy New Year. Your girl took a couple of weeks off to just relax, be with my family, and exist without having to stress over any work. And now I am back and better than ever. No, for real, I am back in my apartment and I am feeling refreshed and renewed and rejuvenated and prepared for the stress that is to come. But we are not here to talk about me today. We're here to talk about you. Because if you submitted PhD applications, then that means it's time to start thinking about interviews. Oh yes, it's interview season. It's here. And it's time to start practicing for those interviews that I just know you're gonna get because you are amazing and I'm sure your applications were phenomenal. So I'm just gonna be going over a few aspects of the interviews that I think might be helpful when you're preparing and practicing. And I decided to make this a 3-part series because there's just too much to talk about in one video. If I tried to make this one video, it would probably end up being like an hour and a half long. I don't wanna sit here and talk for that long. You probably don't wanna sit here and watch me talk for that long. So yeah, 3 videos. 3 videos. I said 3 videos. Wow. 3 videos. So each video is gonna cover a different type of interview that you might encounter. So there are faculty interviews, student interviews, and group interviews, typically that are done when interviewing for PhD programs. This video will cover faculty interviews. My next video will be about student interviews, and the final video will be about group interviews. Now, keep in mind, I'm not entirely sure how programs are doing interviews this year. When I interviewed, it was at the height of the pandemic, and so all of my interviews were online. That may or may not be the case this year. I'm not sure, so just keep that in mind. So first things first, when you're interviewing, you want to look the part, and that just means dress professionally. If your interviews are online, know that that only applies to the waist up. So feel free to stay comfy in your sweatpants and your fluffy socks. That's what I did when I was interviewing, and it was great. But yes, from the waist up, business professional attire. If you wear makeup, keep it on the more natural side. Keep jewelry to a minimum, pair of earrings, maybe a small necklace. Make sure you have good lighting, sit in front of a window if you can. Make sure that you aren't in front of like a super distracting backdrop, all of that. I'm sure you've heard all of these things at some point already. They're pretty much the bare basics of interviewing. So when you get your interview invitation, you will likely receive 2 different interview times. One will be your faculty interview, which is an interview with a faculty member in the program, and the other will be your student interview, which is an interview with a current matriculated student in the program. Like I said, today's video is going to focus only on the faculty interview. Faculty interviews can sound very intimidating. I mean, you're interviewing with someone who has been in the field for 10, 20, maybe even 30 plus years. You really want them to like you, and more importantly, you really want them to rate your interview highly. So because of this, you're probably stressing out over what kinds of questions they're gonna ask you and trying to prepare the most perfect answer so that when they ask you that question, you can just spew out that answer like a memorized script, and it's gonna be perfect and amazing, and relax. Honestly, relax. In my experience, my faculty interviews were much less intense than I thought they were gonna be. Like all of them. Like I did not have a single faculty interview that was as stressful and intense and intimidating as I told myself it was gonna be in my head. Faculty members who are involved in the interview and admissions process oftentimes have been doing this for a very long time. Like so long, in fact, that it's almost second nature to them at this point. And because of this, faculty members who do interviews often stray away from the more traditional a more predictable type of interview style that we might be used to at this point, and they develop their own style of interviewing. So rather than asking all of the predictable questions in a very ask, answer, next question, let's move on kind of approach, it becomes much more conversational with faculty members. So just like be yourself. Like, I know that sounds very, but it's true. Like, they have their interviews in a more conversational style because they are genuinely interested in getting to know you as a person rather than listening to you spew out rehearsed answers to them. And trust me, they will know a rehearsed answer when they hear one. They will. But they want to see your personality. They want to hear how much you care about the field that you're trying to go into. They want to feel how much you care. They don't want to hear a generic answer that they've probably heard a million times already. They don't want to hear a rehearsed answer. Oftentimes, their main goal is to just feel you out and get to know you as a human rather than just a potential student. And I actually had a faculty member tell me this in our interview, that like, that's what they're trying to do. Like, obviously they have to ask you a few questions, but it's really just like a back and forth between two people. So just talk to them, be natural, be enthusiastic, be yourself, but also like, don't get carried away, you know? Don't start like oversharing about a super personal thing that happened to you, or don't like start going on some rant about a super controversial topic. Be yourself, but also keep it reeled in, you know? Like, you still wanna look good. So like I mentioned, even though faculty members are much more interested in just having a conversation with you, they will still ask you questions. They might pull out a few of the old reliables, like, tell me about yourself. And what kind of research are you interested, or whose research are you interested in and why? What made you apply to our program? You know, the very predictable questions like that. They might also have a couple of specific things about your CV that they want to ask. Things like the kind of experience that you listed on your CV, any, you know, publications or research that you have listed on there. But I want to reiterate that these will also very likely be asked in a much more conversational way rather than direct questions. So they might start off with a very generic, tell me about yourself. And then as you're answering that question, they'll hear something that piques their interest, or hear something that is related to something that they wanted to ask you later on. And they'll be like, oh, what was that experience like? What did you learn from that? Oh, that's very interesting. Does that have anything to do with, you know, why you chose to apply to our program? Conversational ways like that will elicit the answers to the questions they're looking for without explicitly asking like a very direct question. And that was my experience in pretty much every single one of my faculty interviews. They might also ask you some questions that on the surface might not seem relevant, but are in this case. Like, they might ask you what you do for fun, any hobbies you might have, what your favorite books are. And again, this all goes back to them trying to get to know you as a person. They might also ask you some other questions like, what are your long-term goals? What are your research plans? Stuff like that. For all of these questions that I'm mentioning, you want to be honest to the extent that you still present well. So you definitely want to think about your answers ahead of time, practice your responses. You don't have to have them perfectly rehearsed and memorized. Just like know what you want to say and how you want to say it. But don't like memorize it like a script. You'll also want to think about questions that they could possibly ask you as follow-up questions based on your answers. And then you'll want to think about answers to those questions and also practice those as well. 2 questions that you may or may not get, but you definitely want to be prepared to answer are, what other schools did you apply to, and how are you going to choose if you get multiple offers? These questions may not seem entirely relevant to the purpose of the interview, but they are. Especially the answer to that second question. If they ask you how many schools you apply to and you ramble off a list of 10, 15, 20 different schools, you are almost guaranteed to get that second question. Because at this point, now they're trying to gauge where their school and their program ranks on your list. So think about that. Think about it hard and know how you're gonna answer. You may not get the question, but know how you're gonna answer if you do. That's so important. Overall, each interview can last anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour long. I know that sounds like a really long time to be sitting there answering questions, but I promise you it is going to fly by, especially if you're interviewing with a particularly friendly or talkative faculty member and you have like a good back and forth going. Oh my God, it's gonna feel like you've been talking to them for 2 minutes. So don't worry about how long the interview is. At the end of the interview, they will ask you if you have any questions for them, and your answer should always be yes. Always, always, always be yes. Like, I cannot stress that enough. You are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. So you want to use those last 5, however many minutes of the interview time that they give you to ask questions to ask questions. You want to come up with maybe 2 to 3 questions to ask them that can help address any questions or concerns that you might be having about the program, especially when it comes to concerns around student support or mentorship or any other aspect of the program that will directly impact your experience there. And you want to ask them because some of their answers might surprise you. I asked a faculty member in one of my interviews what their opinion was of their level of student support, and they were so honest with me. They were like, well, I think it could be better. And I was like, oh, word? What's wrong with it? So ask these questions. Some of their answers might shock you, especially if they're being very brutally honest with themselves and with you. Some other things to note, just more generally about interviews, is that it's usually a whole day process. So you will likely have an opening ceremony in the morning, where a person in the program, usually a chair, or a director, will give some welcoming opening remarks. They will give you a rundown of how things are gonna work throughout the day, maybe a timeline, and then they might give you like a little pep talk of some sort before they kind of dismiss you to go to your first interview of the day if you're like one of the first time slots. And then throughout the day, there's usually like a little waiting room type situation going on. In my case, because my interviews were online, it was a separate Zoom link to like a Zoom meet room, where all of the interviewees could go in and kind of just talk to each other while they were waiting for their interview time slots. And throughout the day, like current students who were in the program were dropping in and just talking to us, answering questions, giving us words of encouragement, telling us about their experience in their program so far. And it was really just like a place to hang out and talk. And it was actually kind of fun. So if you can do that, then I highly suggest you do that, because you also get a little bit more information about the program that way. And then at the end of the interview day, there will probably be a closing ceremony, which will probably be the same person from earlier, giving some parting words of encouragement and support. And they'll probably tell you when to expect a decision letter. And yeah, and that's it. That is what you should expect from, or that is what I think, based on my experience, that you could expect from your faculty interviews. My next video, like I said, will be on what you should expect from student interviews and how you should approach those. And so on that note, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and click that little notification button so you don't miss my next upload. And I will see you in my next one.